Okay, so hello and welcome to the sixth episode of R&D Meets Unplugged. Today we have another incredibly special guest who has truly made his mark in the world of music and beyond. Joining me today is Ric Gordon, an accomplished musician, producer, and record label founder with a career spanning over 5 decades. Ric's going to tell us all about his remarkable career in music in just a moment, but before he does, let me give you a quick rundown of his incredible work. So after moving to New York as a teenager to pursue his musical ambitions, Ric turned to music production, where he established himself in Nashville as an emerging record producer in the early 1970s. Among the highlights, Ric co-produced 3 releases with Fred Foster, Country Music Hall of Fame producer, on the iconic Monument Records label. Returning to his own musical creations by the end of the decade, Ric's released his debut album, Just Can't Get Enough, in 1980. Since then, he has released 16 albums and EPs, I believe, under various names, experimenting with genres ranging from punk rock, electronic music, folk, and Americana. Throughout his prolific career, Ric has produced over 50 albums and EPs for numerous artists across a wide range of genres, and most recently, his new single, Since She's Been Gone, has just launched on Spotify about a week ago. So, an incredible career, Ric. I think we're going to have fun today. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing very well. How are you? Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm delighted to have you, Ric. I'm a little bit nervous, to be honest, speaking with you. Such a hugely respected member of the industry. It really is an amazing Oh, no, really, it's a real privilege to have you on our show. Only our 6th episode, and I'm already speaking to someone with decades of experience in the industry. It's just amazing for me. I first got to know Ric through David, our good friend from the Flying Beats and Sweet Beats. And since we've gotten to know you, we've been so proud to feature on your popular Saturday Showcase feature. I really want to thank you for including us on that. It's a real honor for R&D. To be featured. For someone like you to say that our music has some quality is really spectacular.
Yeah, I like your and Diana's music quite a bit, and so it's fun to be able to have you on the showcase, and no doubt you will find your way onto other of my playlists at other times.
Well, we really appreciate that.
You may be a regular occurrence.
Well, you've been on some of our playlists as well. You've got such a huge catalogue. We've only got 9 songs, 10 coming soon. But yeah, it's just it's so cool for us to get you on. So I've been spending some time diving into your career, Ric, to try and get some hard-hitting questions for you. But don't worry, I'm not gonna do anything too mean.
That's right.
I like to keep it professional. So obviously, given your experience, I've done a lot of research into you. Tell me about your life growing up in Kansas. How you first developed your passion for music. I know it came early, but tell me what happened there.
Yeah, well, it's actually Missouri, not Kansas, but and so that's a common mistake. Kansas City is actually in Missouri.
Okay.
But anyway, I digress. So I did get
European
started
mistake,
very young. When my parents, I had wonderful, loving parents, and they were into music, and my mom was a Bobby Soxer, and they were into big band and Sinatra and that kind of music. And when I was 5, so this is 1958. So when I was 5, I heard Domenico Modugno do a song called Nel Blu di Pinto di Blu. And I still have that record. If I wasn't boxed into my studio right here, I could reach down and grab it. I still have that single. And I heard that record. And it just so moved me. I announced at 5 years old that that's what I wanted to do with my life, was be a musician. And I said I still have that record, and I must have played it over and over and over and over and over and over again until my parents wanted to lock me in the basement or something. I'm sure. And they had a pretty good hi-fi system. It wasn't stereo yet, but my dad had a single JBL speaker mounted up in the wall and a spring-mounted turntable and a Bogan amp unit, and so we had pretty good listening for the time, for the late 50s. And so at 5 years old, I started on the cornet and started learning to read music and developed an embouchure. And by the time I was 7 or 8, I really wanted to be Louis Armstrong. I really wanted to play cornet, and I play cornet very seriously. And so by the time I hit school band, I'd already been playing 2 or 3 years, and all those people had never picked up an instrument before. So I was a bit precocious, and so that sort of served me well. So that's how it all got started.
That's how it all started. I heard you mention before, obviously, when you got a little bit older, that you became a big Beatles fan.
Yeah, I'm wearing John in
there. I didn't even notice.
Yeah.
My mum was an enormous Beatles fan, so that I grew up with a lot of Beatles in the house. But she was like a fan of their early stuff, being a kind of pop woman that she was. Obviously, I then developed the taste for them with all their rock stuff that came more in the late 60s. Tell me about what kind of influence they had on your approach to music.
Well, they changed everything. My dad, my mom and dad were listeners, and they were aficionados. And so in December of 1963, I remember it very well, so I would have been 10 years old. I would have turned 10 that summer in July of 63. My dad brought home an import of the Beatles, Please Please Me. And I was so at 10 years old, I had already been a very serious musician for 5 years, right? Yeah. So I mean, I read music, when I heard the Beatles, it was sort of life changing. And then in February, they were on the Ed Sullivan Show, and everybody saw them. And in April, I started playing guitar. By April, I had convinced my parents to let me keep playing cornet and keep up with my lessons and everything else, but to let me also at the same time start playing guitar and taking guitar lessons. So I ostensibly gave away my allowance for a year in order to get a $28 Red Stella acoustic, 3/4 acoustic. Horrible guitar, which I gave to a roadie, I don't know, 8 or 9 years later on a whim. I wish I still had it. But I started on that in April. So this would have been April of 1964. And on my 11th birthday in July of 1964, I got my first really good guitar, electric guitar, and an amp. I got a 1964, and at the time I had no idea it was the first year they were made because none of that was important. But I got a 1964 SG Junior that had been returned to the music store from rental, and a Gibson Skylark amp, and they were $110. This is 1964, and I wish I had both of them now. And so the funny thing about that is I walked into this music store and they had a Super Beetle sitting there, and I pleaded with my father to buy this gigantic Super Beetle, and of course that was never going to happen. But so this is 60 years old, 60 years ago now, this year. And so in July, I got that SG Junior and a Gibson Skylark amp. And this month, August, 60 years ago in 1964, as I was going into 7th grade, I joined my first band.
Hmm.
and we
And as
played
a
all the
guitarist,
time. Lead singer and guitar. I sang first. I had only played guitar for a few months. We had all only played anything for a few months, but I was a singer first, and then took up lead guitar because I was the only one who had figured out how to do a solo, and it was the solo to Louie Louie. And I remember I learned how to play the solo for Louie Louie by the Kingsmen note for note, and I was immediately transformed from just the singer to the lead guitar player.
it must have been an incredible era to live through. I know that the Beatles, I mean, they changed music everywhere, but just even my mum, she always tells me the story of she was 14 in 1963, and she skipped school to go and see the Beatles in Glasgow in Scotland. They were doing a record store appearance or something like that. And my mum was a good girl. She never skipped school, but she made an exception for the Beatles. I mean, such an era to grow up in, like such a transformation. Tell me, you said, I've heard previously, you were 16, I believe, when you, or you were 14 when you got your union card, but you were 16 when you moved to New York and moved to Greenwich Village. What was it like to go into the music scene at such a young age? I mean, did you feel confident, or were you overawed by that? I mean, obviously you said you'd been a musician for almost 10 years by that point. How did it feel to...
It's all wrapped up with my family life too. And it's, I can't really go into one without the other. I had the most wonderful, loving parents you could ever imagine who couldn't have been more supportive. But at the same time, I had a home life that was unlivable. And so my musical precociousness ended up saving me from that life. And so when I was 14, I became what's now called emancipated. The musicians union wouldn't let you join until you were 14. At least they wouldn't let me join. I know Marty Robbins was playing mandolin with Lester Flatt when he was 10, so they let him join when he was 10. But for me, it was 14. But I joined the musicians union, and I moved out of my parents' house. Not completely, but mostly. I had a much older friend, wonderful man named Willie Wells, who I never knew quite how old Willie was. But when I was 14, I think he was 30. And Willie was the original underground FM disc jockey in this part of the country. And so at that time, so we're talking about 1967. And so in 1967, FM rock radio was brand new. Really, the only radio that played rock was AM hits radio. And then by the late 60s, FM radios came up. And when I was 13, I was in a jam session at a place called the Aquarius, which was a club in town. So you get the year, the name of the club. So when I was 13, I was at this jam session at this club named Aquarius, and there were a lot of illustrious people there. A 12-year-old Pat Metheny was there in that jam session. I was jamming. There must have been, I don't know, 12 or 15 different people, but I met Willie Wells, the DJ, who was sort of there as the master of ceremony for the whole thing. And Willie and I became best friends, and Willie took me under his wing and mentored me. And so when I got my union card at 14, back then music was a profession, right? So the gigs were all any paying gig was controlled by the musicians union. And so to play a club, to play a party, to do anything, to be in the recording studio, to be on TV, to do anything, you had to be a union musician, and the union also brought jobs. Right, there was session work, and there were club jobs, and there were pickup jobs, and so you made a living that way. And so I moved out of my parents' house. I stayed in school. I was a freshman in high school, and we figured out what the minimum number of days that I had to actually be in a classroom was. And so for my 3 years of high school, I did that minimum amount of time and did whatever work I needed to do. I was playing all the time. I had abysmal grades, and my focus was music. And so that was sort of it. So I got my card at 16, and Willie and I started working on things, and I started meeting people in the business and started gigging, and by the time I was 16, I knew I wanted a different direction. I knew the bands were not going to be my pathway to stardom, because people weren't good enough. You couldn't get enough people good enough in a band, where I was at that time, that it was like shooting. It was like a lottery, whether you did it or not. So I decided to go out on my own. I got there's a guitar over here in the corner that I bought when I was 16 years old. I'll grab it.
Yeah, let's see.
I bought this guitar. You see, I've reliced it rather nicely over the last 55 years or so. I bought this Martin D35 when I was 16 years old. So that was 1969. And it was March of 1969. It's Brazilian rosewood. And I decided that was it for bands for me. And my path forward was as when I was gonna quit high school and take the GED and turn 17 and move to New York City. And so that's what I did. I bought this when I was 16, and then the end of, actually, I guess I was still 15 when I bought it, but then the next year, at the end of my junior year, I was 16. I took what's called the GED. It's a general educational equivalency test, and they give you your high school diploma. And I was off. I was free. A month before I turned 17, I moved to Greenwich Village, and we'll put this back. And it. I don't want to make it sound like this Midwest kid moved to Greenwich Village. But like I said, my mentor was a major DJ, and we were doing stuff. And when I got to New York, I was doing sessions. I was a full-time musician. I wasn't there waiting tables or doing something, right? I was living in the village. I was a full-time musician, and it was cool. And Willie and I were still doing stuff back home in Kansas City, where and that continued on. So that's how I got to New York City. I moved there a month before I turned 17. I was 16 years old. Got there, had an apartment, a third floor walk up, and in the village, just right by the bitter end. And when I got there, when I packed my suitcase and got moved in with all my roommates that I was moving in there with, I found an envelope that my dad had left in my suitcase that had $100 bills in it, just in case. That was a lot of money back then. Yeah. We're talking about 1970, so that was a lot of money.
That was a convenient discovery,
Yeah, it was, it was. It served me well, and so that guitar, that big Martin of mine, I never let go of for the next 5 years that I lived in New York City, because I was afraid if I ever took my hands off of it, it'd get stolen. So I literally carried it with me everywhere, slept with it by my bed. I mean, it never left my possession.
It's amazing that you've been able to hold on to it all this time. Spectacular to have such a cherished possession like that.
It is. It is very cherished.
So you said in New York you were in you were doing some session work, you were in some working with other musicians, but you realized that you said in your own words previously you didn't have a voice for stardom. So this was the turning point to move towards music production. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I had been in New York City, I don't know, maybe 30 or 45 seconds before I realized that I did not have a voice that would propel me to start. That's people ask me all the time, do you have to move to New York? Do you have to move to Nashville? Do you have to move to Los Angeles or London, Berlin, Stockholm, wherever? And the answer is yes, because if you don't, you never really know how good everybody else is. And so I had just gotten into the city and gone to my first club, and I think it was Cafe Wa. I'm not sure about that. And everybody I heard, let me rephrase that. Everybody I heard was better than me.
That's tough when you feel that, no?
So, and I've got buddies. I've got a really good buddy in Nashville who's CEO of Nashville Tour Stop, and he is an absolutely drop dead great guitar player. And when he moved to Nashville, he was there about 30 or 45 seconds, went to his first club, and realized every single guitar player in Nashville was better than him. And it's a dose of reality that you can't get in Omaha or Cincinnati or Kansas City, or it's just not the same. So New York was a big wake up call for me, and so I got into learning what the business meant, and it was real interesting. So again, it was 1970 when I got there, and I was there till 75, and the first time, and because I've lived there twice, but it was a real dangerous place in the early 70s, New York City, and it was. The scene was very stratified. It still is, but with the net and everything, it's not the same. But back then, you had the songwriters uptown in the mid '50s, and you had the folkies, in the village, and you had the people doing the singles in Midtown, and you had the punks were sort of down in Soho, and that was a bit later. That was as I was getting ready to leave. But you say you had artists over here and actors over there, and everything was really pretty stratified, and so you got real sucked into your scene, and you really focused on your scene. And so when I got there, my focus as an artist was the folk scene. As a professional musician, it was on whatever work I could get on any day, right? But after realizing that I was not going to be propelled to stardom by my illustrious voice, I started really looking at myself very closely in the mirror and asking myself serious questions about what I wanted to do with my life. And I quickly decided that I did not want to be, hello, Diana. And I did not want to.
You, Diana. Yeah.
And I quickly realized I did not want to be a sideman. I did not want to be somebody's guitar player. that 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 didn't hold the creative whatever it was that I needed. I wasn't going to find it being a guitar player for somebody. And so I started looking around and started trying to make connections. And then I was very lucky and again fell in with someone who was older and would be a bit of a mentor, a guy named David Peel, and who introduced me to some people and got things going. And then at the same time, I started that got me meeting people who booking agents and managers and that kind of things. And so as I started meeting booking agents, particularly people from William Morris and some of the other agencies in town, Willie back in Kansas City and I started producing concerts. And that was my first introduction into producing. And we were doing people like Chet Atkins and Dave Brubeck. We did a Dave Brubeck show all back in the Midwest. And we did Quicksilver Messenger Service, the 60s psychedelic band. And little later on in the 70s, did a wonderful show in Omaha, Nebraska with Todd Rundgren. That the first half of the show was him doing Wizard True Star. And the second half of the show was the introduction of Utopia, the band Utopia, for the first time. And he had M. Frog playing synthesizer. And M. Frog had this 2-story synthesizer riser with the synthesizers facing the audience, and so his back was always to the audience as he ran up and down programming these synthesizers. It was just an amazing thing. So Willie and I have that going on while I'm in New York trying to find my way, and so the big story is timing, you know. Timing is everything, and luck is everything. And there's a saying that luck is preparation that meets opportunity is what luck is. And so I got lucky moving to New York in 1970, because in 1970, record producers were A&R men and worked for the record labels on salary, right? The profession of independent record producer didn't exist yet. It just was starting to exist. And I decided I learned about that and got into that fervor. And I decided that record producer was the role for me. I could write, I could arrange, I could play many instruments, I could write and arrange for many instruments. And boy, when first thing when you get off the bus in Nashville, the first thing you realize is every single person can play 150 instruments well enough to be on a record with them. So that wasn't intimidating at all. Oh God. But that's a whole different thing.
Well, I think what you were saying about luck, it's like you make your own luck for sure. And you started your career, let's say, when you were 5 years old. And you had a lot of self-discipline for sure to make that dream come true. So I agree with you that there is opportunity mixed with preparation.
Yeah, and my poor parents, of course, always thought I'd outgrow it.
Yeah. No.
You know,
it's not what any parent wants to hear. No, I want to be a musician, Mom. It's never the guaranteed income that they hope for.
No, you know, and I was a good Jewish boy, and so I had 2 career paths open to me: doctor or lawyer, or doctor or lawyer, or if I really wanted to do something different, I could be a doctor or a lawyer. And so my poor parents, not only did I not become a doctor or a lawyer, at least not right away, they had. I can just imagine how absolutely horrible my early bands had to be in the basement, you know, 5, 6, 7 days a week, hour on end, you know, when all of us had played for like 6 months. God, we had to just be atrocious.
Was always the worst thing when you lived next to a band. You had to hear them practice. Happened a few times where I'm from. Well, I'm from Glasgow in Scotland, and it's full of musicians. It's just a city of music.
Yeah, well,
so yeah, that
you've got many of my favorite bands.
Oh yeah, who do you like? Who do you like?
I love Las Vegas.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
I know them, but I've never really listened to them. They were huge for a time.
Yeah, they just
20 years ago, maybe.
Completely do it for me. Yeah.
You know, there's a few Scottish bands. There was one, Franz Ferdinand. They were quite good.
I love Franz Ferdinand. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And I don't know if you ever heard of a band, Frightened Rabbit.
Frightened Rabbit. I actually know them.
You know Frightened Rabbit?
I was very, I mean, of course it didn't end well, and so I don't want to dwell there. But I had a 12-string Rickenbacker. So this would have been a Rickenbacker 360. So this would have been about 10 years ago. And Simon, their guitar player, they were on tour. And so Simon and I hooked up, and he bought my 12-string Rickenbacker 360. And so I met them at the tour bus and sold Simon my Rickenbacker 12-string. So I love Frightened.
That's
Frightened
so weird
Rabbit.
because I was a huge fan of Frightened Rabbit in 2007. And then I was looking for a new apartment, and I went to view a room in an apartment, and it was Scott and Grant who had the apartment. So I lived with Grant, and got to know Scott and Grant quite a bit. They played, I don't know if you know their record, with Modern Leper. What's the record called?
Yeah.
He played this. He was playing live in my bedroom briefly in the summer of 2007. That was one of my highlights of my life, was getting to know those guys. And
great
of course,
stuff.
Obviously, sadly, Scott lost his life six years ago now. Terrible tragedy. I was absolutely gutted by that.
I was too. It hit me hard the way it played out. Over a matter of a few days, and knowing he was not in a good place, and sort of knowing it was not going to end well. Yeah, that's a real shame. They were. I actually covered one of their songs live.
Yeah, which one?
Well, I knew you were going to ask that, I'm very
always difficult to remember.
So. God damn it! If any other time, it'll come to me at some point. I need a set list in front of me. But I used to do an acoustic version. So anyway, yeah, cool stuff. So that's me in New York City.
Well, I know, obviously from my research, that you then, by the late 70s, there was a bit of a death in the punk rock scene. That disco was kind of taking hold. And you reached a kind of turning point in your life where you decided to make an exit from the music business. Tell me about that.
Yeah, that was much later. So I left New York in 1975 and moved back home, and things were. I did that for two reasons. One is things in my family were very bad, and so I wanted to be close to the family for a year or two. And I had the opportunity with another producer to take control of a recording studio and start signing artists and become real record producers. And so I came back to Kansas City in 75 for that opportunity. And so that led me. My father was killed towards the end of 1976, and after that, I moved to Nashville. We had been producing. We had signed some artists. We had publishing on some songs, and so Nashville became the target, and I got success. I had success with Monument Records and became a charting record producer. And so that sort of propelled me then to doing an album of my own the next year, and that propelled me to touring and 200 days a year. And because this is pre anything days, right? This is where your record was on the radio, and the way you reach people was touring, and so it was radio, tour. And you'd hit a city on tour, and the first thing you'd have to do is go to the record distributor and either play a show for all their employees or just hang out for a while or something. And then you do some interviews, and then you play a show, and then you're back on the bus and, back in the trucks, and you're off to the next place. And so
is it as glamorous as it seems, the rock star life?
It is every bit as glamorous as it seems. It is horrid drudgery that goes on day after day after day. And so if you look at the first half of my music career in perspective, so it starts full speed ahead when I get my union card, right? And I've got an older mentor, and we're really doing stuff. And so from 14 years old until I turned 30, it was, move out of the house, move to New York City, move to Nashville, have a chart record, release my own album, go on tour. And that was all in the span from 1967 to 1983. And so by 1983, I was turning 30. And I was exhausted.
For sure.
And what I needed was a break. And it's the one thing I really regret in my life. And I don't regret much because we make our own choices, and fuck it, right? You do what you do, and everybody makes mistakes, and everybody does stuff, and it doesn't pay off. Sitting here with the experience of old age, it doesn't pay off to regret stuff. So just live with what you do, right? But the one thing I do regret is I got talked out of the music business at that point. And what I needed was a rest. What I needed was 6 months off or a year off. And we had the royalties to live on, and I didn't need to just give it up, but I got talked into giving it up, and it all worked out okay. My now ex-wife, my now deceased ex-wife, her biological clock was ticking, and we couldn't start a family on the road 200 days a year as a musician, right? It just, things don't work that way. And so I changed path at that point, and started college as a freshman. I had never gone to college, and I'm not a big fan of college. And to your younger musician listeners, I will say, if you really want to be a musician, if you want to be an artist, any kind of artist, not just musician, any kind of artist, actor, fine arts, anything, if the arts are your thing, do it while you're young. That's where the opportunity is. You can always fucking go to college. Go to college when you're older. Don't give up 4 or 5 years at the core time in your career to go to college. Just don't do it. You either have what it takes to make a career or not, and college isn't going to help them. And so
I would agree with that.
So I feel real strongly about that.
So many people were just forced to go to, where I come from, or university or college, it was like that was your only option when you got to 17. Like, are you going to go to university, or are you going to go to college? What are you going to do?
And a lot depends on your own decisions, right? I moved to New York City. I moved to Nashville. If you're going to stay in Cincinnati or Denver, right, or Leicester, right, or
you
wherever,
make it happen.
right? right, then you need to be honest with yourself. Are you going to have a real career in the music business from Cincinnati? Probably not. Not the kind that you don't need to go to college for, right? So there's some honesty, but if you're committed and you're going to move to Nashville or New York and you really want to have a career in the business, don't get college in the way.
All of these kind of, let's say, sport or arts, if you want to be the best or you want to make a career, there's always somewhere you have to go to train or learn your craft, and it's very rarely in your hometown. So I think it's just something that has to be done.
And success, regardless of what it comes in, and I found it a couple different ways. I found it in music, but I also found it as a scientist in the business world, in the industry world, and it's sort of the same both ways. And you pave the way to success with sacrifice, and finding success is directly related to how much you're willing to sacrifice to get there.
Yeah,
and so you sacrifice home and family. If you want to be an F1 driver, you move to Europe. If you want to race bicycles, you move to Europe, right? You don't have a choice. If you don't move to Europe, you're never going to race bicycles or be an F1 driver, right? Just so. They're just those sacrifices that you have to make. And
one of my heroes in the sports world, Andy Murray, a tennis player. I was just watching his documentary recently because he just retired. And when he was 13 and 14, he was comparing himself to Rafa Nadal. And he said, look, Rafa's playing in the clay courts for 6 hours a day. I'm playing 1.5 hours a day in Scotland. I have to move to Spain. So he moved to Barcelona, like me, actually. Although I was 30. He moved there when he was 14. And that training in Spain propelled him to become one of the best tennis players of the last 20 years. And without that passion and motivation, you're not going to make something of yourself. It's all very well trying a little bit and then kind of hiding behind failure. But if you really want to succeed, you just have to keep going every day, hard work, and ignore all the other external pressures and I guess concerns that those that you get from doing that. It's not easy, but it's what has to be done.
Yeah.
I think you showed that, like moving to New York at 17. I mean, that must have been amazing. Really, I'm very envious of the young life that you had, because when I was 17, I was still living in a small town. So yeah, you definitely achieved a lot so young.
Well, you do what you're allowed to do, and I had parents that were incredibly supportive at a very young age. I mean, I don't remember when it was, but I had to be 7 or 8. And I remember my grandmother arguing with my parents and then winning that argument because no one ever lost an argument with my grandmother and lived. But other than that, she won that argument. The next thing I knew, she had me by the hand and she was taking me to see West Side Story. And I don't know, I don't remember what year that came out, but I had to be 7 or 8 or 9 or something, and not old enough to go see West Side Story. But she knew I had to hear that music. And so she argued with my parents about the subject matter of the movie because she knew I had to hear that music. And so I grew up in this wonderful, supportive environment, that nurtured my dream, while at the same time it ripped itself apart in such horror, that I don't want to go into here. I don't think we need to lay that on people. That's out in my threads. If people want to read, the death of my father and the way I grew up, they can go find that shit. But yeah, so I switched directions at 30 years old, and wished I hadn't. I had unfinished business in the music business.
You said that was a regret, but tell me, what did you do? And you obviously, I know you got your PhD in theoretical physics.
Actually, yeah, and that was a lark. I mean, to be real honest, I was, a lot of people who are musically precocious at a very young age also tend to be mathematically precocious. And so I always knew I had that, and I always really loved science, right? Followed the space program and all that. And so I decided at 30 years old that I was going to become a physicist. And so I started as a college freshman. I'd never been to college. So I remember I started the summer that I turned 30. So I started, like everything in my life, it started that June right before my birthday when I was 29. And I started as a college freshman. And I remember one of my first classes was intermediate algebra, not even college algebra, because I'd never taken an algebra class because only reason they even let me in, it was a state school. They let me in because I was so old. I was 30 years old. Well, they'll give this old fucker a chance to find a new career. Yeah. So I went straight through. I was lucky. I didn't have to do student loans or anything. So this was 1983 to 1986. I was able to live on royalties. I was able to live on money that I had made in the music business and put away and not been stupid with. And so I did an undergraduate degree in physics. And then I started looking for a job. And in the year that I looked for a job, I did all the coursework, the required coursework to a PhD. And then at the end of that year, I got a job with the Chubb Corporation, and so didn't pursue my PhD anymore. At that point, I picked it back up a few years later, but went to work for them. And when was that? 1987, and there were like a handful of physicists that sort of went into the financial industry at the end of the 80s. And I was in that group, and it was literally a handful of people. There was a guy that was at the World Bank in Switzerland. There was a guy at Merrill Lynch, and there's another guy at Goldman, and I was at Chubb, and there was a guy that was at General Reinsurance, and we were all applying the mathematics of physics to financial modeling, and so it was an interesting time, and so I did that for the next 20 years. Most of my focus was artificial intelligence. Of the 20 papers that I have published, 18 of them have something directly to do with AI, and so I was one of the early people working with artificial neural networks, which are now what are called AI, ChatGPT, all that thing. Those are all artificial neural networks. So I published my first scientific paper on artificial neural networks in 1991.
Wow.
So
you were ahead of the game there.
Yeah, very early in the game, and we had a whole group at Chubb called the Computational Intelligence Laboratory, and the guy I was the head of it, and the guy who was my number one, my second in command, we're still friends. We're friends with him and his wife, and they live back east, just outside New York City in New Jersey. And we see them every year when we go back there. And so, yeah, it was an interesting time.
What's your opinion on ChatGPT specifically? How do you rate it? What do you think? What do you think specifically about the controversy about it being not free? Basically, I mean, Elon Musk was behind the creation of how I understand it.
Well, no, he wasn't.
He was part of it financially.
Yeah, it's bigger than that. It's ChatGPT. GPT stands for General Purpose Technology, And artificial neural networks are general purpose technologies. And so what that means formally, if you're a mathematician or a scientist, what that means is an artificial neural network with more than 2 layers, with 3 layers or more of neurons, is a universal function approximator. So that any mathematical function it can do. Well, any mathematical function is all that's necessary to create the universe, right? So anything that can be expressed mathematically can be done by a 3-layer or more artificial neural network. And so we were, even 30 years ago, we were doing all kinds of incredible problem solving with them. I built a model that diagnosed affective disorder. I did a lot of modeling of climate change and hurricanes and El Nino and that kind of thing with artificial neural networks. I did financial modeling with them. And so, neural networks, AI, is going to transform the world. We had the Industrial Revolution, right, where we went from making things with our hands to making things with machines. And then we had the analog revolution, right, where we had tubes and we could build machines that could do more complex things for us, that could actually understand instructions and do those kinds of things. And then we went from the analog revolution to the digital revolution, and things ramped up this huge orders of magnitude now because we're able to do such amazing computational power. And so AI is not going to be something doing something. AI is the next infrastructure revolution, and we're doing that now. And that's what companies like NVIDIA with their chipsets and servers are doing, is we're shifting now from a digital infrastructure to an AI infrastructure. And so there are going to be a lot of profound ramifications about that. Am I scared of AI coming and killing me in my sleep? No. Am I scared of AI becoming conscious? No. There are still a lot of really hard problems for AI, like crossing the street, being able to stand on a sidewalk, judge the traffic coming for both directions, judge the heights and speeds and everything else that we do, right, without even thinking. It's not even a conscious act for us to cross the street. We could literally do it with our eyes closed because blind people do it every day, right? Sure. You take our best robot and you go set it out to cross the street and the fucker will get hit by a car right off, right? So, language, understanding writing, text. So there's still a lot of big problems. But so AI, don't think about, for me, don't think about AI as this thing that's going to do stuff, right? Think about it as an infrastructure on which our lives going forward will be built, like the digital infrastructure or the analog infrastructure. And I think if you approach it that way, you'll understand AI a lot better and you'll get along with it a lot better. I use it all the time.
Oh yeah, I use GPT a lot as well. I think there's a lot of positives, obviously, that can come from AI. One of my fears is the control of society in general, with being able to control people with technology and limit their ability to travel, limit their ability to access funds. If people can't
that has never required AI.
Well, that's true. That's true.
That's been done very effectively.
It can do, yeah.
Right. It didn't require. Once we acquired fire,
makes it easier though. Sure.
It does. Every new technology makes it easier. And I choose not to worry about that kind of stuff. I have a saying: give me the sativa to change the things I can, and the indica to live with the things I can't. And
Well, it's funny. I've
So,
had quite a few arguments with GPT, and since I started using it, like when I first started using that, I was really curious about the technology. Now I use it a lot for research and stuff for the work that I do, but it doesn't always give the right answer. It often provides misinformation, and sometimes for no apparent reason, for a very simple task, and it can it just blatantly provides misinformation. And I'll say to it, "Hey, that's wrong." "Oh yeah, you're right. You're right. I'm wrong. I'm really sorry."
well, and realize though that's the power of it, because you're asking it to do things it was never trained for.
Yeah, no, it's unbelievable, the tool. I mean,
Right,
I said it to Deanna most days. Like, actually, I said it to her today.
Your computer will only do what you program it to do. AI and ChatGPT is not the only AI. That's only one, and it's not even the most important one. So, but AI in general is machine learning that are bred to do particular tasks. The things about the GPT models, and there are many GPT models, is that they're general purpose technology. So one of the things we found is when you give these large language models are truly learning, and I could tell you mathematically how that's done, but nobody cares, but they truly learn, right? And so when you give them the entire medical literature, they just don't memorize the medical literature. They make the connections and they learn how to do medicine. And that's what's been surprising that's come out of these models is you install them in your factory and you let them run and they learn how to run your factory, right? It's machine learning, and that requires a certain amount of conditioning and controlling of the learning and a certain amount of free learning, just like you would with a kid, right? You let a kid learn stuff on their own a bit, and then you say, no, that's wrong. Just because A doesn't mean D, right? You have to have B and C first. And so, so there's AI is interesting shit. I had a real fun time in it. I keep up with the literature. I'm very invested in it, but
let me ask you one more question about that. Tell me, what about quantum computing? Because this is a subject I don't really know about, and I'm guessing you probably know a little, but at least a little bit about it. How is that going to shape our future?
Quantum computing is not what people envision it as. Quantum computing right now is a very inefficient way to solve very large problems. And at some point, it will be able to be scaled up. Quantum computing is the computing industry's version of nuclear fusion. It's a technology that in your head as a scientist is very easy to understand and conceptualize. We know exactly how the sun works and how nucleosynthesis happens and all that stuff. We understand exactly how quantum entanglements, allow qubits to handle data. And both technologies, I think, are going to stay just a step ahead, right? We may have useful nuclear fusion before I die. I do not think we are going to have useful quantum computation. I mean, useful in a way other than useful for incredibly large-scale scientific problems, right? I mean, useful in a general way. I don't think we're going to have useful quantum computation within my lifetime, and I plan to live till I'm 110. Yeah. So that's 40 more years, right?
That's pretty good.
So
I would say that's quite optimistic, but I'm rooting for you for sure.
Yeah, I will also say I don't expect that I don't expect that AI will become sentient, that consciousness will be attainable by AI until AI becomes quantum.
Well,
I think consciousness goes beyond mere computation. I think I think our consciousness, myself, this is my own bias. I think our consciousness is intertwined with the idea of quantum entanglement, and I don't think an AI can be conscious like we're conscious until it's in a substrate that can become conscious, and that won't happen until it's on a quantum computer, which I don't think will be in my lifetime if I live to be 110.
well, I mean, I'm not going to say I haven't thought about it becoming conscious. I don't fear that as much as I fear the technology being misused by those with malintentions. That's one of the things that concerns me.
See, I'm not worried about that at all, because the reality is I can't set foot out my door and walk 5 feet without being on camera.
Yeah.
And if I continue to walk, I'm on camera wherever it is that I walk. And all you need is clustering algorithms to track me. You don't need AI. We've been able to do that for decades now. And so it's
already too late, basically. Too late.
Yeah, shit. Where are you going to go commit a crime, right? We don't need AI for that, because you're going to be on camera wherever it is. I remember very distinctly when I was growing up, being told by teachers, "Oh, we'll never get a picture of a car crash happening, or a plane crashing, or anything like that," because but now everybody has a camera, right? And so we get pictures of that kind of stuff all the time because there is always a camera there. But 50 years ago, it was impossible to ever get that kind of shot, that there might be a camera there, right? You get the Pulitzer Prize if you get that shot. And so it's just, to me, it's degrees. My field of physics is complexity, and in complexity, behaviors are emergent. And so when the Industrial Revolution happened, societal changes were emergent that went along with that. And there will be societal changes that are emergent with AI. And I don't worry about them any more than I worried about, Nixon, or the Vietnam War, or World War II. I wasn't around in World War II, but I remember being a kid, and there was World War I, and then there was World War II. And I remember asking my dad when my World War would be coming. When I was 6, 7, or 8.
Maybe it's coming pretty soon. Who knows? And
so I choose personally, not to look at the world and life that way. I tend to accept the advance of technology and the changes of the world pragmatically, and work to try and help guide those changes as best I can,
and use them to your benefit, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have to be pragmatic about it. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
I want to get off go back to, obviously, you 20 years then out of the business. Tell me how you got back into music. This is, I think, what's important to people. How did you get back into the industry?
I got divorced.
Well, that's probably the best way to get to do it. It was not a marriage made in heaven. I became a single parent to my daughter. I not only got divorced, my oldest daughter was out of the house by then in college in California, but my youngest daughter was 13 when we got divorced, and I got custody of her, and so I became a full-time single parent to a teenage girl. And I will tell you that getting a record on the charts was about 10 times easier than being a single male parent to a teenage girl. Oh, fuck. How you manage that? I struggle to take care of a dog. So my dog's 3 years old, and that she's stressful, you know. So I don't know how about a teenage daughter. That would be definitely a stress. No.
Yeah. So I got divorced, and as soon as I got divorced, I was things were different. I started thinking about what I wanted to do with my life from that point on. So that was 2007. And so I would have been 54 years old. And I had been out of the music business for a quarter century. And as soon as I had control of my life again, the only thing I knew for certain is I didn't want to be in the business world anymore, and I wanted to be back in the music business. And so I did that. And so in 2007, I went out and bought Pro Tools, which was a lot of money. You had to buy a computer software. Back then, you had to buy a computer that you couldn't do anything else with. It couldn't go online. It couldn't run it ran Windows, but it couldn't run Microsoft Word or do anything like that. It had to be built to only run Pro Tools. And so I bought Pro Tools. I set up a recording studio in the living room of this house, and I taught myself Pro Tools and retaught myself how to be a record producer. And then a year later, I founded Russian Winter Records, which was an indie record label, and started making indie records and producing indie records. And I started playing and writing myself, and oh God, was I bored. I was so bad. You know, I played during my years as a scientist, you know, for my own joy and for the kids when they were young and that kind of thing. But I didn't have any chops, you know. And so when I started back, I just had no chops at all. And so I struggled to re-find my place. I was able to find my place as a producer quicker than I was able to regain chops as a writer or singer, or, you know, guitar player. And just now, so that was 2007, and this is 2024. So it feels like just the last 2 years, or even the last 4 years, maybe, that I'm sort of completely back. Like right now, sitting here, I think I'm playing and writing the best that I've ever played or written my entire life. Wow, I certainly, you know, back then I was a you know, I could produce anything, I could arrange anything, right? But I was a punk musician as an artist, and so now I find I write or play just about anything I want to, which is damn confusing. But you know, so when I came back to it, it was just sort of struggling to find my place. The record industry had not yet changed, right? Napster was really yet to come, and streaming was yet to come. And so when I came back to the business, a record label was still a manufacturing company, right? And people don't understand that. People don't relate to that. You know, if you grow up playing music in a local band somewhere, you think about the record industry as being all about bands, right? And all about music. But the record industry was a manufacturer. We were about making product, putting it into boxes and sending it to stores to be sold on the shelves, right? And so it was running a manufacturing business, and it just so happened music was your product, and so you put your life and your soul into your product. But you know, it was different as
completely
music. You know, it was just different. It was like it was when I started. It was a profession, right? It was something you did. Like I've got, you can see some records on the wall behind me. Every record, every CD I produced is on the wall here somewhere in my studio. And there's a whole wall of them over here that are all limited edition CDs that we put out, that we co-curated with music blogs, big music blogs, and would make limited edition CDs of them, which meant there were only 500 or 1,000. And when they were gone, it was gone for good, right? And so you know, we did a lot of that, and so it was really about selling stuff, right?
There's something about having that product, no, having that
it was, you know,
piece of music. It was a different sensation, and you would listen to an album. People don't often listen to albums now; they just want to play tracks or play playlists, which is good.
I don't think I'm releasing any more albums. I mean, I might compile singles into a package.
Kind of what we're doing at the moment.
You know, but I'm not making any more albums. I don't have time. You know, when you look at what singles mean in the business right now. So like right here, sitting here in my studio talking to you, I've got a production slate with enough songs on it that starting in January next year, if I stay on my production schedule, I can release a single, an A-side single, every 2 months through the end of 2026. And so when I look now at my output, my writing output, I'm just throwing away everything that would have been an album filler, right?
Yeah.
Because the focus is really on singles. And so I'm sitting here with, like, you know, 15 songs on my production slate while I'm throwing away a couple of dozen that will never be heard by anybody. That would have been album cuts, right? But the world isn't about 3 or 4 singles and 8 or 10 album cuts anymore, right? No. It's about singles. And you know, so from that standpoint, it's the streaming has raised the bar quite a bit.
Yeah, it's changed everything. Something we've been discussing, actually, because I wanted to release, or we are going to release our album, but like you say, it's basically the collection of singles that we have. I said to Deanna, we have to keep a couple back so that at least we've got some new material. But I mean, it was different in the past. You would have 3 or 4 singles and then a track with 10 new tracks, or sorry, an album with 10 tracks that no one had heard before, and half of them were just, like you say, filler. But now it's more a question of, can I make a brilliant song? Can we make another brilliant song? Can we make another? Well, I'm being a bit optimistic saying brilliant, but can we make decent music at least?
Yeah, and you know, and those album tracks were real important. That's how you made livings. That's how songwriters made living. You know, a songwriter and a publisher on a record, on a vinyl record or a CD, you know, split 9.1 cents for every CD sold for every song on that CD. So, you know, if you're a songwriter and you write one of those album tracks, right, and it's not even a single, it's not something people are really even listening to much, but you write one of those album tracks and you get that track on a million selling record, you know, that's how people made livings. And so, you know, that was important. And radio was an important part of that, you know, because radio was all paid all to the songwriter. You know, bands didn't get any money for being on the radio. The record label didn't get money for being on the radio. Radio performance royalties go to the publisher and the songwriter. And so, you know, those things, that's how you made livings. You know, you brought in money and you paid the mortgage and you bought food.
Well, it's just, you've got so much knowledge, Rick. I could keep you here all night, but it's already 75 minutes, so I'm going to bring it to close. I'm going to wrap things up, and just maybe you can tell me like a couple of things. I want to know, obviously you said you're working, you've got singles coming out for the next few years. What else is in the pipeline? And after you tell me that, what advice would you give to someone? You said obviously young to work hard, but let's say anyone, any of any age, I would say, just working their way into the business. What advice would you give us?
All right, let's leave the advice for the last thing. Mm-hmm. What I've got coming is I'm very active in the studio right now. So I just released last Friday, Since She's Been Gone, which is sort of my take on Delta Blues. I've got September 13th, Friday the 13th in September is Too Young for Dying. And it's a record I'm really very proud of. It's my first real rock recording in 7 years.
Okay.
I play everything on it. I play everything on Since She's Been Gone as well. And I like to do that when I can. But I'm really want to ask everybody to please go out there and listen to my music and listen to Since She's Been Gone and Too Young for Dying comes out. I think you're going to like it. It's a cool rock record. It's got a good hook, and I think you're going to like it a lot. I'm working on a reggae thing right now, which means it sounds like the Police. Because I'm better at sounding like Steam than I am Jimmy Cliff. And so I'm working on a bunch of jazz stuff. I'm working on 2 or 3 real jazz things, which amaze me, because I'm so not that kind of player. But I for some reason I seem to be very effective at writing it right now and playing it. My plan, if I can stay ahead of my production. And I'm doing that right now. Things are going very well in the studio, and I'm staying ahead of things. My plan is every other month to release a rock record, and then every other month to release something else: blues, jazz, folk, rhythm and blues, reggae, something different. So September 13th is my first rock recording in 7 years. That's going to be my last record for this year, because I don't like to release in the holiday season. It's not a good place for anybody but the biggest artists to be releasing. So January or February, depending on whether we're quiet or having an insurrection, I'll release my reggae track. And then I'll follow that up with something rock, and then we'll go every other month after that, and it'll be cool. So that's my plans right now. I've taken this year off from live gigs. This is the first time in decades that I have not played a live gig. Since the first time since I came back to the music business that I have not played a live gig, so I could just focus on recording and releases and that kind of stuff. So that's sort of where I am and where I'm going. Advice. I am a big live your dreams guy. The only person that's stopping you from living your dreams is you, right? You are the most effective gatekeeper on your dreams and your career. So you need to get past that first gatekeeper. But at the same time, my first commandment of the arts, of the music business, is thou shalt not bullshit thyself. Mm-hmm. And so, if you're going to pursue your dreams, you can't pursue your dreams and bullshit yourself at the same time. So know what you're doing, know how you're going to do it, know what your real place in the world is, and be honest about your abilities. Be honest with yourself. That if you start just understanding that everybody you will meet in New York, Nashville, and Los Angeles is so much fucking better than you are, that if you can just get that off the table to start with, you're halfway to a successful career, because then you're not crippled with imposter syndrome. We're all imposters because every fucking guitar player in Nashville is better than me. But that didn't mean I didn't have a career, right? Every record producer is better than me. It didn't mean I didn't have a career. And it didn't mean that Jimi Hendrix didn't have the same thing. When Jimi Hendrix got to London and realized, oh, God damn, look how good everybody is. You know,
I heard that Eric Clapton, when he heard Hendrix the first time, that's what he felt, imposter syndrome. He's like, I have to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember. Here, I'll give you one more story and then we'll be gone. I was in a recording session in Nashville, and after the session, there was a little jam session, and Tony Joe White was there. He was the guy that did the song Polk Salad Annie in the 60s, and he is a fantastic artist. He died a couple years ago, and I can't remember who it was that came in the door. But there was a guitar player that came in the door, and as soon as Tony Joe White saw him, he put his guitar back in the case. And that had a real effect on me. So it's been 50 years now, 45 years now since that happened. And it had a real effect on me because you can't you can't approach stuff that way. You just have to accept that everybody in the whole world is better than you. And so that's incredibly freeing as an artist, right? It just, you do what you do as best as you can do it with the knowledge that you're not Hendrix, you're not Eddie Van Halen, right? You know?
That's brilliant advice.
So who cares, right?
Yeah. It's art, you just have to do it yourself.
You do.
The best you can and see if people like it. If they don't, what can you do?
Yeah, and it doesn't mean you can't make a living, and it doesn't mean you can't have a good life. I've had a wonderful life in the music business, and I have a wonderful place in it. I'm not unknown, but I'm not known. I'm somewhere in between. And it's a wonderful place to be and have artistic freedom and be able to live and do what you want, and, you know. So everybody go out and do that shit.
I think you're living the dream, Rick, because that is basically our ambition, I would say, to be in a place where you can just create and make a living from it. You don't need to be the richest person or the most successful person, but to make something from the thing that you love is the most freeing thing that we can have in the world, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to let you go now. It's been fascinating. It's been so interesting and just a brilliant experience to speak to you, Rick. I'm so happy we could get you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us, really. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. And thanks to Diana. It's been wonderful for you guys to have me. And I wish you nothing but the best. I love your music. I love what Diana doing with her music. And so let's just keep moving forward, guys.
Thank you so much, man. It's just been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Rick. I will speak to you soon.